Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to my channel. In this series called the Yu-Gi-Oh! Project, I'm making a playable and modernized deck for every character that has ever appeared in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise. In this episode, I'm making a deck for Shoma Yusa, the main protagonist from the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Structures manga. This manga is currently released only in Japan and features real-life meta decks and is focused more on dueling than on story itself. Shoma Yusa is the first main protagonist that I'm doing, and as the most protagonists go, he has many different decks or archetypes that he plays throughout the series. I have not read the manga so far, so I cannot comment on Shoma's personality, so just read his Wikipedia page for that kind of information. In the manga, he so far played 6 different decks. The first 2 decks are based around Tenny and Yang Zing monsters. The first one has more Tenny monsters and the second one is more Yang Zing heavy. Then he plays a Fire Warrior deck that mostly consists of Infernoble Knights. Then he also plays a Gaia deck and he also plays a Datascape deck. In this episode, by request of a dear viewer of this channel, I will be making his second deck, aka the Yang Zing deck, but I will adapt it to be a pure Yang Zing deck since my friend requested if I could do one. So I'm using Shoma Yusa as a legitimate reason to make this deck, but if you want to play his exact manga deck, the entire manga deck list is published online on the Wikipedia or inside the OCG Structures manga, so take a look at that. Yang Zing was the first Wyrm archetype that was released in the game, and what an archetype it was. It featured Chinese dragons inspired art, which I still find very cool, and also relied heavily on synchro mechanic, and it also had insane floating, interruption and negation effects. The deck was one of the easiest to make so far, as the deck is actually good from the start and is designed to work, so there was little work to be done. This deck is more of a control deck as it has many interruptions and negates, and uses that advantage afterwards to beat down opponent with averagely thick monsters. I also tried to keep the deck extra pure, so no Tenjis and Mares have found their way into the main deck. This deck will also be constructed according to the 6 deck building rules of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Project. And before we get to that deck profile, please like this video, subscribe to my channel and tell me in the comment below what do you want to see next. Alright, in the main deck we are playing 2 copies of Zefranyu, the Pendulum Yang Zing, which is amazing as it can force a search upon being destroyed, and its level is also very handy for level 8 or 7 synchro summons. 1 copy of Taoti, because it has the most attack of all main deck Yang Zing monsters, and that can be beneficial in certain situations, and this card can also perform a synchro summon during the opponent's turn. Then 2 copies of Suani, because it has a high attack value and can again perform a synchro summon during an opponent's turn. 2 Bians for the same purpose as the latter monster. 1 Zefraxi because it can treat a monster as a tuner and can enable us some not so standard synchro plays. 2 Bixis for the same reason as Swani, except that this one has a high defense stat instead of high attack stat. 3 copies of Jiaotu, the best main deck monster, as it can summon 2 Yang Zing monsters from the main deck for the cost of 2 cards, and that usually enables us a thick extra deck play. Then 1 Lao, because it is a level 1 monster that can perform a synchro summon during an opponent's turn. Then 3 copies of Chiwen, because it is a level 1 tuner and can special summon itself from the graveyard. 3 copies of Yang Zing Pet to recycle monsters from the graveyard and to draw 2 cards. 2 Black Holes to wipe the board and to trigger Yang Zing floating effects. 1 Called by the Grave to somehow deal with hand traps. 3 copies of Torrential Tribute for the same reason as Black Hole, but the only difference is that you resolve this card usually during an opponent's turn. 3 copies of Yang Zing Creation, the second best Yang Zing card, as it allows us to swarm the board and then use those monsters for potential synchro summons. 2 Mistakes to cripple our opponent, because our deck does not search that much. 1 Skill Drain, as it can stop 70% of the decks you normally encounter and hurts our deck hardly at all. 2 Rivalries of the Warlords to control opponent's board, because we only play 1 type of monsters predominantly, but you can swap this card for some copies of Unending Nightmare to deal with back row heavy decks, for example. 2 copies of Solemn Judgment for Omni Negates, and 3 copies of the most insane Yang Zing card, the 9 Pillars of Yang Zing, as it acts as the Omni Negate and even triggers Yang Zing monster floating effects. In the side deck there are some cards which would fit in the archetype but did not make the cut, some below average Yang Zing cards and some utility cards which you can consider playing. Then in the extra deck we're playing 1 Xiaofeng because it locks an opponent out of effects and swarms the board when it destroys a monster. Level 8 tennis synchro monster, 2 OTK, 3 Baxias, the best Yang Zing monster. This card is so insane because it shovels opponent's cards back into their deck and you can often perform this effect during the opponent's turn. 2 copies of Yazi because it has a nice targeting protection. 1 Metafist Horus for utility effect. 1 Tatsunoko for synchro plays if you happen to draw high level monsters. 1 Link for Tenny because it has a nice body and summons a token, and it also protects our other monsters. 1 Toti Dragon to lock our opponent from playing spells and traps. The Nightmare Duo for utility, and 2 Tenny Link, 2 monsters to Link climb into Tenny Link for monster. And that would be it for the deck profile, so let's see the deck in action.